All right, Psalms. Psalms 140. I don't know if anyone gets into racing too much or motor racing. I know Brendan a little bit with, and then Steve was here with his Bathurst. I like the Formula One. I like watching it. Used to be on free to air, and I used to go home on a Sunday night and watch it about 9 o'clock, which was great for our time zone. Now it's on Foxtel, and I keep thinking, I'm going to go around to my mum's house on a Sunday night just to watch the Formula One. I like seeing what Daniel Ricciardo's doing, and I like to see if someone can beat Hamilton, and I like those kinds of things, and see what the developments are in the F1 world. But you get those turns, and you get like turn 1 and into turn 2 and 3, and you get towards the end, you get about to turn 14, and you turn to the home straight. And I think tonight, Psalm 140 feels like turn number 14. Like here it's the last turn, and we're down now to the last straight, the last 10 chapters all the way here to the finish line of Psalm 120. It seems like it's been a long lap for sure. But here we are at Psalm number 140. And it's just 13 verses. Follow along as I read. It says, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David. Deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man. Preserve me from the violent man, which imagine mischiefs in their heart. Continually are they gathered together for war. They have sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. Selah. Keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from the violent man, who hath purposed to overthrow my goings. The proud have hid a snare for me and cords. They have spread a net by the wayside." That's the wayside that I was mentioning of. "They have set gins for me." It's an interesting word, isn't it? It's where we actually take our title tonight, is from that word. "Selah. I said unto the Lord, Thou art my God. Hear the voice of my supplications, O Lord. O God, the Lord, the strength of my salvation. Thou hast covered my head in the day of battle. Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked. Further not his wicked device, lest they exalt themselves, Selah. As for the head of those that compass me about, let the mischief of their own lips cover them. Let burning coals fall upon them. Let them be cast into the fire, into deep pits, that they rise not up again. Let not an evil speaker be established in the earth. Evil shall hunt the violent man to overthrow him. I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted, and the right of the poor. Surely the righteous shall give thanks unto thy name. The upright shall dwell in thy presence." Psalm 140. Interesting one tonight. Got some thoughts. I have some thoughts. More notes here than I normally would have tonight. But what about your thoughts? Any observations, any verses stick out to you as you read this? Hopefully you did. Hopefully you're still in the habit of reading in advance and not just reading now and when we first read it. Anybody? Any verses, any thoughts, any observations, any comments, any questions, any queries?
I notice Satan gets a fair dib in this one. Gets a fair mention, like personally, and others around him obviously, but it's he, the man that sets those traps, I guess.
Definitely. Satan is our enemy.
Yeah, but it just how it's mentioned, how it's written in here, I found it quite prevalent.
Like a serpent.
Yeah.
And he sets the snares and the traps. I was actually going to go in that direction. Probably time prevented me from going down. The verse that kept coming to my mind, I was thinking the same thing as reading this, was we are not ignorant of his devices. Yeah. That he has those devices, yeah. That Satan absolutely lays snares and traps for the saints. And had we had time, like I said, I would have gone there. I stopped short just for time's sake. Any other comments, observations? All right, stumped as well, huh? Not much out of all of that. Or hang on just 1 second, and the microphone's back. Oh, Cole. He's going to develop his thought that he just had. So he goes, stand over there and come back to me.
Just that, quite often there's a passage in the Psalms where the psalmist or the speaker is being affected by people who have a negative influence, and it's interesting to see him cry out for help against them and to develop a position against them. And I think that seems to be what this is about.
Absolutely. It's definitely the voice and the oppression of the enemy, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Kyle, did you have that thought, or you?
Yeah, just
Verse 9.
Or verse 8 as well. Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked, further not his wicked device, lest they exalt themselves. As for the head of those that compass me about, let the mischief of their own lips cover them. So it's like whatever they want to do against David, let that come upon them. And it reminds me of Mordecai and Haman when he builds the gallows to try and, because he wants to see Mordecai hang on the gallows, but he hangs on the gallows that he built. So it's interesting the way that works. It reminds me of the verse in Proverbs as well. I think it says he that...
yeah, that's the verse I was thinking.
Yeah, what is it? It's something about if he rolls a stone and the stone will come back on him or something like that.
And also digs a ditch, digs a pit, and then falls
fall
therein.
into it. Yeah. But yeah, you see that. That's almost like a natural occurrence as well. Like you see that happen. Like it's something that God set up that. It's almost like reaping what you've sown. It's a similar principle.
Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, they're the wisdom books.
Yeah.
So it's hardwired into how life operates.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think the first two words.
Deliver me. You have to say it again though, because now he's there.
The first two words say it all. I think it is. It's deliver me, because the rest is all cause and effect.
Yeah.
It's cause and effect.
Yeah. I'll give you my thoughts. So we'll got my notes here and clock's ticking away. Thank you, Connor. Unless, of course, you have something to...
So you're preaching on the gins, is it?
The gins, yeah.
Gins, yeah, well, it's a good job you're not preaching from Amelia's Bible, because it says grins in her Bible.
The grins.
The grins, there's an R in there for some strange reason.
It's a spelling, that's a typo
Yeah.
in her Bible. It's gins, Gin. Gin. Kyron gave me a Bible, just on that, before I get started. He gave me a Bible when I went away to Bible college. I got a couple of Bibles. I got one from the church that I still have and still use, and I got one from Kyron as well that I used extensively as my class Bible, because it was about this big. It was a Cambridge. But it said in the very front page that it was an irregular version. That it actually had known typos or known mistakes, and obviously it's this book that didn't want to just throw it away, so they just put a cover page in it and said there's an error here and here and here. So I had one very similar that had typos or mistakes, and actually I still have that Bible as well, and it was, like I said, my class Bible that was just easy to throw in my book bag and take off to classes. Thank you, Kai, if you're tuning in tonight. Thank you very much. I still have it. 140 here. Here. I could tell you this. I don't know much about catching things. In general, there are great huntsmen and there are great people that can hunt and to prowl. I know possums. That's all. My only claim to fame is I can catch a possum. And I have possums I still have possums at my house. I have not won the battle over the possums. In fact, someone came to the house this week or last week, and they said, "Oh, I haven't been to this house for a long time. My good friends used to live at this house, and said we used to come all the time." And she was telling about things, and then we painted, and Rhiannon was saying we painted the wall. She said, "Oh, you have? Yes. Oh, yes, different, and this is taking." So she's there recognizing it. She said, "One thing I always remember about this house, it was a wildlife house." It's like, why wasn't that in the write-up at the real estate? And it's still a wildlife house. And Rhiannon said yes. So I can catch possums. Apples are good for catching possums. You ever want to catch a possum? They are suckers for apples. We have a locust tree. I googled that today because I was confused. And locust tree was how it pronounced, even though I thought it was locust. So anyway, the little things. Anyway, my Google search said that they were also known as the smelly toe fruit tree, which I don't. Maybe we're talking about different trees there. Anyway. So we're going with locusts. I like locusts. I'm not sure I want to call them the smelly toe fruit because the possums love them as well, man. We just find them right by our door. They eat them and then just the stone fruit are all the way in there. So they love those kinds of things. Pears, I found that pears are really good for possums. Man, you put them out in one night. We've caught a couple in one night, just like in an hour's time. In they come for the apples or the pears or whatever kind of fruit. They love it. They really do, and you catch them very quickly. So there are these ways to catch. And David is saying, my enemy is trying to lay snares and traps for me. That's what he's saying. He's trying to do all his utmost to try and ensnare and entrap and catch me. And he says, God, I need deliverance from what is being laid out before me. Now, because of my time in the US, I have a lot of my Facebook friends are primarily in the US because that's the way to keep up contact with them. I don't keep I do Australian friends of sorts, but a lot of them are in the United States. So in a political year such as this in the United States, and man, it gets flooded with posts and flooded with pro-Trump, anti-Trump, this Trump, that Trump, the last Trump. It's on there all the time. And so one of the ones I saw today was some meme that was about Nancy Pelosi and her hair and how she wasn't wearing a mask. In Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. They're the third most powerful person in the United States, or so, something like that. Anyway, she wasn't wearing a mask. She got her hair done. And she got her hair done, and she wasn't wearing a mask, and it was on security cameras, and anyway, she should have been wearing a mask, and anyway, so they jump all over her about it, rightly or wrongly. But I couldn't help but think, and I'm no fan of Nancy Pelosi and all the things that she stands for, but politics are dirty. That's one thing that I'm always reminded of, and the videos that they send out about Trump. And then the Democrats send out videos, and then the Republicans send out videos, and it's even dirtier over there than it is here. We have some dirty politics, and particularly we've seen in the last few years as people come up to slay the Prime Minister and take the position, and some dirty stabbing in the backs and things like that. We've seen it over here, but it just seems to be even more over there. And it's ugly, and it doesn't matter. As soon as you enter into politics, you enter into a very dark, dirty realm where there are power struggles between people, and only today did I realize David, out of everything that he was and everything of his life, he was also a politician in that sense that he was a king. He was the one that's in charge, and so he had advisors, he had people who were for him, he had people who were against him, he had people in the outer kingdom and without his kingdom that he had outright enemies of. Philistines hated David, and then you have the Ammonites and the Amalekites and the Syrians and the Edomites and the Moabites, and he fought against all of them and had made enemies in those battles, and when he won and took land. And so he had enemies, many enemies from without, but he also had enemies within. Sometimes you think of David as the great leader, and therefore everyone looks to David, and today they look back and think, David, what a king of Israel. But in the time, he had his enemies. He had those who hated him and despised him. The whole entire tribe, it seemed, of Benjamin was not a fan of David because he had taken the kingdom from Saul, who was a Benjamite, and now the kingdom and the lineage has now gone through Judah. So there was those like Shimei, who was a Benjamite, who held great grudges against them taking the king family to a different lineage. And so there were those. And then there was the ones like his advisor, Ahithophel, who was so bitter against him and hated him at the very end because of what he had done to his granddaughter with Bathsheba. And so there was great animosity there, and he was one of the advisors. So there was these enemies from without, there were enemies within, and they were all had one goal: to bring him down. It's a very similar psalm to what Psalm 3 is, when it says, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? Surely they set themselves to bring down the king. It's a similar vein. David had his enemies. And so David writes this knowing, God, I am beset by enemies. And that verse number 5, it says, the proud have hid a snare for me and cords. It's like a picture of of someone laying a trap, and a booby trap with some line that you go around and you walk into the leaves and it will grab around the ankles and hoist the person up. That's kind of the idea, that it's these hidden traps that are there to ensnare and to trap and to catch him out. And he says these are the things that have happened. He says they have spread a net by the wayside. And that's what I was thinking. What is the wayside? Well, the way has to do with the path. But the side, there's two words used there in the Hebrew. One of them has to do with an open hand, as opposed to another Hebrew word, which specifically means closed hand. That's tied up in the word wayside. And I was thinking, what does that mean? But think about this. What is the wayside? It's not the highway, really, it's the byway. So it's almost like someone saying, right, why don't you come over here? Like with an open hand, leading the person to say, come this way. You don't really do that with your closed fists. Go this way. It's an open hand that is saying, like, come this way. And so here he's saying people are there in his life trying to get them to go down a particular path that is designed for his failure. And he says, God, help me to not go down the wayside. And the devil is very good at calling people off the straight and narrow to go down the wayside. And he's there with his open hand saying, it seems so innocent. Because a person with open hands, that symbol as a hand gesture is to say, I'm innocent. My motives are pure and my motives are good. And so with open hands, he's saying, come this way. This is good. But the devil there with his trickery is calling people into a snare, into a trap, beguiling and tricking. Isn't that what the strange woman does to the young man who is simple and foolish? He goes past the house, he goes towards the house, he turns away and goes down the corner of her house, and she calls him in, and Solomon says he doesn't realize that he is going to be entrapped and ensnared, and he's not going to know until a dart strikes through his liver that he has wasted his substance there with the strange woman. And David feels like that's how people are trying to get him. They've sharpened their tongues, they imagine mischief in their hearts, he says in verse 2. Continually are they gathered together for war, and it might be the war from without the other enemies, or it's a war of words within maybe the palace and maybe within his realm and the different factions in the political parties and those that have power struggles. It just seems like they're gathered together for war. They've sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. And then he says, they have set gins for me. You can't look at gins and think, what does it mean by gins? It has to do with a trap, but it's like a bear trap. We have another word like an engine. Engine comes from gin. So it has to do with a mechanical trap, a mechanicalized contraption. And so he says this contraption, they've mechanicalized it, or they've whatever. He said they've put some thought, some effort into how they can get him. And our enemies, he said, my enemy has put great effort into trying to ensnare and trap me. And it's the engines of the enemy is how I would title this tonight. Now, he goes on and he says in verse number 8, grant not as, O Lord, the desires of the wicked. And I couldn't help but think of Psalm 17, verse 13, where it says, arise, O Lord, disappoint him, because they have great swelling anticipation of defeat. And David is saying, disappoint them. Disappoint them, O God. And when we preached Psalm 17, we just simply entitled it, we serve a disappointing God, because God is a great way of disappointing the enemies, his enemies. But go to Nehemiah chapter 6 very quickly. I want to show you this. Came across this in study, and I thought it tied in very well. Nehemiah. Why am I going that way? It's before Psalms, not after. I say that for my own benefit. Nehemiah chapter number 6. Nehemiah chapter number 6. what you see in Nehemiah 6, the first half, is identical to what David would have been facing and what he writes about. He says, I had many enemies that are trying to persuade me and step in the way of me trying to do a good work and doing the right thing. And there are those who are trying to pull me aside. And you have here, as Nehemiah is trying to build the wall, it gets to the stage where the walls are up but the doors are not on. It says in chapter 6, verse 1, Now it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and there was no breach left therein, though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. Oh no, that's the oft comment at that particular place, the plain of oh no, this is not good. But it was. They wanted to go to one of the villages in the plain of oh no, come meet, leave where you are, come over here. But the reason that they were saying it, they had mischief in their heart, which is exactly what David says. They devise mischief against me. It means in their imaginations and their thinkings and in their private conversations, they're plotting and scheming and planning the downfall of David. Well, that's exactly what Sanballat and Tobias and Geshem were doing in their private residence. They were plotting, planning and scheming the downfall of Nehemiah. And they said, right, here's our plan number one. Let's get him away from the wall. Let's get him into the villages of Ono. And once you get him there, then got him. And whatever they had. But they had planned mischief against him. And then look at this, verse 3. And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease whilst I leave it and come down to you? And did they quit? Well, no, look what it says. Verse 4. Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort. They came again, and again, and again, and again. And this is what the devil does. If you don't get it the first time, well, I'm going to try the tactic again, and I'm going to try it again, I'm going to try it again, because we just had come to a place where we just go, all right, I'll go there. I'll relinquish where I am and what I'm doing, and I will bow down to you. And I'll just go meet with you for 5 minutes and pull aside. Well, that's part of the trap. That's part of the ensnaring. It's what David acknowledged. Don't let me turn out of the way, out of that wayside. Nehemiah said, I'm not going to go there. I've got a work to do, and I'm not going to be distracted and go down to where you want me to go. So 4 times after that. And then it says here in verse 5, Then Sanballat his servant then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the 5th time. They didn't quit. Just kept coming one after the other, after the other, after the other, times with an open letter in his hand, wherein was written, It is reported among the heathen, and Geshmu saith it, that thou and the Jews think to rebel. For which cause thou buildest the wall, that thou mayest be their king, according to these words. And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, There is a king in Judah, and now shall it be reported to the king according to these words. Come now, therefore, and let us take counsel together. So they up the ante and say, well, this is what's been talked about you. And they devise slanderous words, which is exactly what David is saying. He says there are those who are thinking mischief. They have a lying tongue about David. They wanted to speak and spread slander, things that are not true. And that's what is happening here with Nehemiah. One of the parts of the charity chart is thinketh no evil, because when you dislike someone, the very thing that is so preeminent in your thoughts towards them is everything they do you think of in a negative light. And he says, and they were just looking, everything about Nehemiah was a negative. Everything they viewed about David was negative. And if you're an enemy of someone, you can only see them as all the negative things, not the positive. And they were seeing it negative after negative. There is a tweet this week that came out from one of the NBA journalists, and it made the headlines because LeBron James made a shot, who plays for the LA Lakers, LeBron James, and he made some shot towards the end of the game, and then this journalist tweeted just 2 words, LeBron, and then clutch, capital letters. And what he meant was LeBron is a clutch player. Man, give the ball to LeBron. You can trust him in the clutch dying moments of the game. Now that seems insignificant, but everyone was jumping on it because Skip Bayless, who was the journalist, has for his whole career said nothing but negative things about LeBron, and all of a sudden people are saying, well, hey, this is a positive comment that you made about LeBron, because he has made a career out of picking every fault about LeBron. Now, at times, LeBron James, particularly on his political stances, is an easy target to find fault with, and someone who's wealthy, but he is known, Skip Bayless is known for someone who's always picking fault with LeBron James. And now he's saying something positive, and they're like, whoa, this is strange and peculiar. There are people who are always finding fault, always want to be the one to find the negative in something. And with Nehemiah, and David had that, and David and Nehemiah are both saying, God, please, you deal with their false tongues accordingly. You know it's false, God. And they gave it to God, which is the right way to handle it. Just give it to God. It's not for you to always defend yourself. Just give false accusations to God. Verse 7, he says, and these, verse 8 says, then I sent unto him, saying, there are no such things done as thou sayest, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. So they answered it and responded to it, but never went down to it. He says, for all have made us afraid, which is exactly what their goal was. The enemy's goal was to make them afraid. The enemy's goal in David's day was to make David afraid. And Nehemiah had enemies that wanted to make him afraid. And he says here, thou wast appointed prophets. Oh no, hang on. For they had made us afraid, saying, their hands shall be weakened from the work, that it be not done. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. Afterward I came into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Deliah, the son of Mahatabeel, who was shut up. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God, within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Yea, in the night will they come to slay thee. So he goes to this person. I was trying to work out what this was being said, but it seems like Nehemiah goes to this individual who he trusted. And he says to Nehemiah, I'm shut up. And it might have meant that he's been in time in prayer and fasting and away from everyone. He's been alone with God. And he says, now, why don't we go into the temple and we'll lock the doors inside the temple, maybe all the way into the Holy of Holies, just into that temple where it's safe. But who is supposed to go into the temple? It's the priest. It's not just for anyone to go into. So he thinks about it and is thinking, man, what's going on here? And he says in verse 11, and I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that, being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. How about that? He's trying to do right, but the enemies against Nehemiah, and David experienced the same thing. Not only were they known enemies without that weren't of the countrymen, but there were enemies within who these external enemies were now hiring and helping because they found to be on the same agenda. They did not like Nehemiah. So they all had this all of a sudden. What is it? There is a saying, I just thought of it, and you probably remember it. Something about how enemies are united in common hatred. I don't know how that works. There is a saying that goes something along the lines that enemies are united in a common hatred. So these two people may normally hate each other, but all of a sudden they're friends because they have a common enemy. And there is a more pithy way of saying that, and I can't remember how it goes. But here are these two people that should be enemies. All of a sudden they're on the same team because they're against the same person. And David had that in his kingdom. He had all of a sudden people in his kingdom who were friends now with other kingdoms because they all hated David. David knew what it was like. Nehemiah knew what it was like, with enemies within, enemies without. And he said, and he says, look at verse 12. And lo, behold, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced it because Sanballat had hired him, and Tobiah. Therefore was he hired, that I should be afraid and do so and sin. That's why he was hired. They were trying to get Nehemiah to sin. Because if they got Nehemiah to sin, then they could discredit him and dishonor him, and they could cast him down by getting Nehemiah to get out of the way. But Nehemiah was all of these traps and snares and gins that had been laid for him, and he had to navigate his way around and stay the course and do the good that God had called him to do. And David writes Psalms 140 with a very similar vein, that the enemies are trying their utmost to get him out of the wayside, to get him down the wayside, to get him down the side alley, to shame him, to entrap him, to ensnare him, to get him caught up, to see him coming out of the prostitute's house, or to see him doing this or that. That's the enemy. And he says, I must be very careful. God, help me and deliver me from the temptations that are forever trying to beset me and the enemies that are trying to ensnare me. God, deliver me. And God also enact upon them their wicked ways and repay to them the wickedness that they are trying to pay to me. And so you look at this psalm, we realize actually we probably are aware of this in some smaller or lesser degree. You realize that the devil does try and lay snares out for us to try and ensnare and entrap and to get us out the way, and with open hands say, go this way. Go this way. But he's got engines. He's got gins and traps and snares down the wayside. Stay the path and be aware of the enemy. Isn't that what Jesus said we ought to pray every day? Teach us how to pray. Well, one of the things we ought to pray is, deliver us from evil and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So pray every day, God, help me to overcome the wicked one. You can overcome him. There is victory. But be wary of his devices and his snares and his gins. All right, we're going to leave it off there.